Hi, welcome to Silent Generation. I'm Joseph,
I'm Nathan.
and this week we're talking about privately owned rail. So, for public transit systems across the world, the public nature extends to the fact that they're built and managed by local governments. But many passenger rail systems have origins in private business, being built by enterprising businessmen seeking to serve a need while also making a personal fortune. Some systems across the world have flipped back and forth from nationalization to privatization. I think it's an interesting lens to look at the current state of America, too.
Yeah, it's a nice thing to fantasize about here because the state of American public transit is so poor. And we were once the best country in the world for public transportation at the point in time when public transportation was almost entirely privately run and built.
Yeah. And it leaves all these strange kind of echoes for like older places, that like our systems were kind of cobbled together by independent people versus the very like top down way they're built now.
Yeah. What's interesting, though, is Chicago's system, even though it was built by 4 companies, which we'll get to, it's very uniform.
Yeah.
Because the construction of the loop, it standardized the gauges, the train cars that were run. And so our system across all 8 lines uses the same train cars, which you can't say for other cities with really old systems like Boston and New York City.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was the case in other places. But yeah, I watched like a video about New York train operators. And they were talking about all the different quirks of the different cars. And I'm like, oh no, in Chicago, the insides change sometimes. And there's the nice new ones with the pretty screens. But by and large, they're all the same dimensions.
Yeah, I feel like each legacy transit city, their citizens have like one thing about their system that they look to other systems and they're like, oh, that backwards random thing, why isn't it everywhere? Like with us, it's elevated trains.
Oh, yeah.
With New York City, it's express service. With Boston, actually, they think it's really strange when a system doesn't have different cars for every line.
Oh, every line?
Yes.
How many lines do they have even, though?
Yeah, they have 4 or 3 that are heavy rail, 1 that's light rail. And they actually have 1 that is a subway line with overhead wires. It's a very rare hybrid.
Yeah, no, that's bizarre.
And then I don't know if you can relate, but for me, urbanism was kind of a gateway to me believing in market forces. I'm still very much a leftist. I'm not a neoliberal or a free market fundamentalist, but looking at the housing market and how much our government and zoning laws constrain things and reduce the supply, it made me open up and consider that actually market forces sometimes can produce good results. And rail is a bit less pronounced, but I also think there are things I can learn, and I have an openness through urbanism to private companies just because of that.
Yeah, I think it was just kind of, looking at it through an urbanist lens kind of changed my perception when I realized, I don't know, I always associate conservatism with cars. That just seems like a tantamount kind of thing. But then like learning that privately run streetcars were beat by very government-funded road systems just kind of like upended what I thought. And there's a lot of like nuance to how that happened. With LA, everyone loves to believe the kind of like, the evil car lobby got together and bought up all the lines and destroyed them. And there's more to it that is not wrong, but there's like more context to it. But it made me kind of open my eyes to that. Like the government kind of out-competing or putting their thumb on the scales of certain forms of transport and then still saying that it's a free market when it's really not.
Yeah. No, railroads were the most capitalist thing during a point in time.
Exactly.
There's this quote from Sagar and Juddy once where he talked about to be wealthy is to own the railroad.
Yes.
Like it really is owning a system that large.
I was reading some book. It was taking place in England in like late 1800s, early 1900s. And they just like one of the background topics is always investing in railroads. Like it was just the hottest thing to do. And like fortunes were being made and lost. And it was like a plot point at some point. But yeah, sometimes if I want to feel like flip and contrarian, I'll say that like I hate car-dependent suburbia for libertarian reasons, just to see what kind of reaction that gets from someone, because it's like you wouldn't expect that. I don't do a lot of that stuff. I don't do a lot of just like saying shit to get a reaction, but I don't know. I do think it's really an inversion of how people think things are.
No, libertarians will often concede that, okay, there are a few government functions they think they should actually still perform, which are like the military funding roads and then also the judicial system. But I even once met a libertarian who wanted the judicial system to be privatized.
Yeah, you'll always find one. Yeah. Libertarians hate when you bring up roads. That's the meme. Yeah, libertarians in car-dependent suburbia I do think is funny because they're living off the government dime. But then I have respect for people who live in unincorporated areas, where they
Yeah.
have very minimal government services. Yeah, my aunt lives in an unincorporated area, and she tried to join a library system, and they said it would cost like thousands of dollars or something for them to just like basically a la carte add that service to her bill. Yeah.
I mean, libraries are expensive to run. It costs quite a bit, but thankfully taxpayers do like to fund them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we can start out by just mentioning that the history of privately owned rail in Chicago, before we go into Chicago in more depth, it's very similar to the other three legacy transit cities, New York City, Philadelphia, and Boston. But we're not going to go into depth with them because, I mean, New York City alone is just incredibly complex. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, like there's the book, The Lost Subways of North America, which has really great diagrams, but the section on New York City, he really skimps out because it's just too much work.
Yeah. What's interesting is these like charismatic railroad builders of the time, they would hop around cities a bit. Like there's one guy, Charles Yerkes, who's basically responsible for the loop in Chicago.
Yeah.
He got run out of town and just went to New York and then to London. And he was instrumental in the underground at that stage in its life.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they were like, it is, yes, like city history, but sometimes it's more of the history of these like esoteric, these like one-off guys of questionable character, like running from capital to capital, trying to sell their railroad system.
Yeah, because Yerkes, he was responsible for getting the loop constructed, I believe, right?
Yeah, yeah. It was through like, a lot of political horse trading and bribery and that kind of stuff. It's crazy to think about it now because the loop was just as built up as it is now, and he was literally just building it on top of roads. Like I don't know, it's from a different era. That's why I'm drawn to this subject, I think, is because it seems like such a like, in this era of public transit, we're like, oh, let's do a study, let's do a feasibility. Like, what if ridership doesn't match projections? It's just so much hemming and hawing, when before it was just these guys taking big bets and often ending up very bankrupt too.
Yeah, like they would do really anything they could to get these lines built because at the time, public transportation was basically just transportation. There were very few private automobiles. But actually, Yerkes, in the construction of the loop, that was a major feat because it was just as unpopular then as it would have been today.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we're the only North American city with elevated rail lines running through our downtown.
Yeah.
Like, that is really hard to pull off. He had to get, like, majority support in every section he built the line, which was a lot of political maneuvering.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Like, I wonder if I was alive at that time, if I would have been against it. Like, I think I probably would have been. It just seems intuitively kind of wrong.
Yeah.
I think that, like, with the just kind of perception of Chicago politics, that story is very nicely woven into just like, that's how we do it in Chicago. You just pay people off and we make big things happen.
Yeah. And now I think we can talk about Chicago more in depth. So here, there were 4 different private companies that built the Chicago L. They were the Chicago and South Side Rapid Transit Railroad, the Lake Street Elevated Railroad, the Metropolitan West Side Elevated Railroad, and the Northwestern Elevated Railroad. The system was later unified in 1911 by the Chicago Elevated Railroads Collateral Trust, but initially it was run separately, and each of the lines, they actually had a terminal downtown, and then they were later connected with the loop.
Yeah. So before 1911, that would have been crazy to use like different, I don't know if they had a token system or anything, but yeah, just like inconsistent fares and everything. Like, it's amazing that they were able to build up enough momentum and build this, essential service when it was so haphazard.
Yeah. The first line, that was the one that connected the loop to the World's Columbian Exposition. We talked about that a bit on our World's Fair episode. And that one initially was actually run with steam trains. That's how old it was.
No, it's kind of crazy to think about it. And we also, in terms of like strange ways of locomotion, we had cable cars as well, a la San Francisco and stuff. But those were all gone by like 1906. It's just obviously a much more complicated way to do things than electric moving.
Yeah, for people who don't know, that's a completely different technology. Yeah. So, cable cars and trolleys, they visually look very similar, but they're different.
Yeah. I know the cable car does make sense from like, it feels like you have to develop a lot of different technologies in order to get electric traction really going. But with cable cars, you can just have a building somewhere that's doing all the work, and then you're just yanking a car along. It's a lot more Victorian, I think, in its outlook.
Yeah, they're like probably horses, actually.
Yeah. Well, that's like the predecessor to all these is omnibuses, which were like cars on rails but being pulled by horses who I guess wouldn't step into the rails somehow or something. I don't know. Yeah, that's like prehistory in my mind. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
So what was better about the Chicago L back in the day when it was privately run? There are a couple of things I think that made it better, but the first one I want to discuss actually, I don't know, I don't think so, but there used to be way more stations. Today, I believe we have 146, but back in the day, there were 227. And if you look at maps of the system, it's ridiculous how dense the stations were on each line.
Yeah. Our friend Julia, who has written about public transit for newspapers and stuff, she was the first one who said to me, like, it was too much. In fact, there's too many right now, is what she would say. Specifically on one portion of the Red Line, I will admit that, like, going from Lawrence to Argyle is, like, comically short. That one's a little bit funny. But, yeah, it's nice to live very close to a stop.
It is.
Like, I'm lucky the one I'm close to has, like, 2 staffed entrances. And if I had to go one more block, I would be like, a little miffed. Yeah.
Yeah. No, this density of stations in Chicago today is still much closer than the global average because we have about 100 miles of track and 146 stations. So that's less than, we have one station for less than every mile. So that's pretty like closely packed together. But I grew up off the Brown Line, which is one of the sections of the city where it's like, every station is spaced less than every half mile. It's really close, but that's also the most charming part of the L, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think it's very much like having close stop spacing is a marker of being a legacy transit system from this private era. I imagine, I'm sure someone else has like come to this conclusion with more evidence and stuff, but that it's like when you're building things from a property development standpoint, you want more stations because that's a very objective measure. You can sell a plot of land saying that it is a brisk 4-minute walk from a station, and then just later you'll deal with actually serving it and the kind of knock-on effects of having a lot of stations. But that's one of the themes that comes up in the privatization of rail is a big focus on property development and then kind of neglecting service.
Yeah. The way they tried to offer service though with so many stations is really interesting. It was with what was called skip stop service. So stations were classified as A stations, B stations, and then the more important stations were both. So it was a way of essentially offering express service without having dedicated track for express service.
Yeah.
But I don't know how good or bad it really was back in the day.
Yeah, I swear I tried to like find out more about that. Because like, wouldn't that really, of course, the important stations, yes, as you said, would be both services. And I imagine those were the downtown ones because everything in Chicago transit-wise is very like unipolar, geared towards the loop. And any kind of like deviation from that I find very fascinating. But yeah, it'd be annoying if you are just an along the route traveler. Like if you live on one stop, your girlfriend lives on another, but your A and B stops. Like
it probably got pretty frustrating, but they got rid of that like system after they started closing stations after the 50s. They were like, after a certain point, it just didn't make sense. And they just started to run trains normally like they do today. And then what exactly is express service? I'm sorry for any listeners who don't take public transit like frequently or at all. Hopefully this isn't too confusing, but express service is when trains skip a bunch of stops and then only go to the more important ones.
Yeah.
And our system used to have so much more of it than it does today. Like currently it's only the Purple Line that offers it during rush hour periods in the morning and after work. And otherwise those express tracks never get used.
Yeah, and expresses are like, they're hard because you need more tracks to do it, basically. Or else like you'll just get caught behind a regular service car.
Yeah. It's fun though when you get on the Purple Line and you get to like skip over 9 stations in a row.
Yeah, you're just flying. It feels great. I have like only one time I've really taken the Purple Line Express and it still sticks out in my mind. I left my little like internship in the Loop and I was at the end of the Purple Line at Linden, which just feels so different. Like you're just in a parking lot and there's all these beautiful like Evanston homes. And I think it was like 35 minutes or something, but I was like, man, this is great. Like I just got away with something. I feel like all those schmucks waiting along the stations.
Yeah, it's really zen because the train cars are also not super full by the time it starts to go express to Linden. And so you get all this space and you can just zone out.
Yeah, exactly.
But there used to be other express services and lines throughout the system. You can still actually see some of them. Like, for example, the southern branch of the Green Line, if you walk underneath it, you'll see that there's a gap between the tracks on the left and right side. There's a space in the middle. And that used to be a third track that was used for express service during the morning or evening rush.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Chicago, it makes a lot more sense when you understand there used to be express service. Because I've often caught myself thinking, like, in the far-flung neighborhoods like Rogers Park, like, there's these large old homes. And I'm like, all right, the person working here would have worked in the Loop. They were probably some type of like banker or businessman, but they bought that property and they were just okay with having like a 45-minute train ride into the city. And the answer is like, no, it would have been like 20 or 25, with express service. And now people just kind of have to deal.
What's interesting too is the Northside Main Line, which is what the Purple Line runs on today, that actually used to have even more express tracks south of Armitage, like, along where Sedgwick, Chicago, Merchandise Mart, that used to also be double tracked. But they got rid of that because they reduced the number of stations after the 50s and there just wasn't a need to really skip it anymore.
Yeah, I work over by there and you can tell very like large, wide, like this could accommodate a lot more than it's being used for basically.
Yeah. No, it's really frustrating when you see that and you just question if service was better back in the day.
Yeah.
But actually, that brings us to frequency and ridership because the numbers actually indicate that we are able to serve as many people today as we did 100 years ago. Like around the peak of the L, the system, it would carry on average 627,000 passengers per weekday. Our system doesn't actually currently have those numbers because post-pandemic, our ridership is still down. Yeah. But if you look at the CTA's ridership reports and go a bit farther back to 2008, 2009, before Uber was a really big thing, like May 2008, 645,000 riders per weekday. So exceeding actually what it was around its peak.
And you told me that rail ridership has bounced back much more than bus ridership.
This year it has. But no, on average, actually, bus ridership was doing a bit better in Chicago than rail ridership. But this year it's doing better.
Yeah, I just wonder about that. Like, because, buses, I think that does serve more people who have, like, not work from home jobs.
Where it's less of an option.
Yeah. Besides, like, the Lakeshore Express buses, those are more for, like, people who could work from home, knowledge economy type stuff.
Yeah, in public transit, there's this concept of the choice rider, someone who has the money to take or to own a car and use it, but chooses instead to use public transportation. Yeah. And bus riders tend to, on average, do not be choice riders. Yeah. Like rail, like subway riders, much more likely.
I remember reading this thing about how like buses are shown in media, of how like in British media, it's just like another place you can have a setting, like for an interaction or a character and their thoughts or just, running into someone. But in America, the bus is largely used to show how like low and how like a character's lost their job. So they're on the bus now because they had to sell their car. I think about the movie Nightcrawler, where like to show how desperate this character is for any job, he takes 3 buses in LA to get to an interview. And it's like, can you imagine anything worse than that? Taking 3 buses.
Yeah. More than 2 connections is pretty brutal. Yeah.
And then one thing, if we're in the nostalgic mood right now for the olden days, not just L service, but like its integration with the streetcar network.
Yeah.
So this is more kind of related to buses because the idea was like, we don't need streetcars anymore. They're inflexible and they get clogged in traffic. We'll replace them with buses and it'll be just as good. And then it was not, but it's better for drivers, definitely. Yeah. But Chicago's very unipolar system is fine when it's buttressed by really good like neighborhood to neighborhood streetcar systems, like it you're less reliant on that kind of like downtown funnel. And so losing that, I just think, I don't know. I know you do a like bus to train commute, but I've had those and I just hated them a lot. Like it just feels like it's always something can go wrong and you're starting your day in traffic most of the time, which is not so great, even if you can read during it and all that. I don't know.
I don't currently have that commute, but I've done that in the past. But for me, I'm not actually super nostalgic for streetcars because there are all these problems with them where like if a car or anything else is blocking the path, I can't go around them. Yeah. Buses are more well suited for modern American streets in that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, riding an actual streetcar, it's more smooth. Yeah. But it is a really tragic loss for most American cities. Like, say if you live in Kansas City, where they now only have one streetcar line, they used to have dozens.
Yeah.
For us, we still have a really large heavy rail system. We didn't lose as much, but most American cities did.
Yeah. No, it just feels like, I don't know, the story of America past World War II has been just like this consolidation of large cities becoming more and more important and powerful. And then like second banana cities, as I call them, like getting neglected. And one of those is like, yeah, sorry, if you weren't big enough to build heavy rail back in the day, like, and you were just relying on streetcars, because that was good for your city back then, you're going to lose them. You're just going to lose your streetcars to buses, and that's going to be the end of it. And you're much more primed for the suburbanization of your city.
Yeah. Well, I learned something through research this week that was fascinating, which was that at one point, the railroads, they were the second larger employer in the country after agriculture, which is crazy. But think about that many people with railroad related skills. And that was definitely part of the reason why it was cheaper to build and maintain transit back in the day.
Yeah, that's an angle people don't bring up. I've only seen it on like one urbanist video where they were just saying that like with, European very train heavy cities, like it's this whole industry. Not like we've talked about, the city as a jobs program in a lot of ways, but like these are often pretty good jobs, and they're like one of the few factory jobs in Europe. A lot of times is making these train cars, and then it's also a knowledge economy job too for engineers and for planning systems. Like, not that cars don't employ a lot of people too, but I don't know, you get more taxpayer money back for pummeling an industry like full of trained people, than you do for like car mechanics and tire shops and that kind of stuff.
And then one thing related to the early history of the Chicago L. So last week on my birthday, the Chicago CTA was running really old, over 100-year-old train cars in the loop, and they were the 4000 series, and I got to ride one.
Ah, that's so good. Did you get on at the Quincy station?
No, I passed through it, but I got to ride around the entire inner loop one time. And it was really nice because the windows were full-sized and all the way open. And I can see why they were only like driving the trains in the inner loop, because if they were driving through like a tunnel or something, like people would just stick their arm all the way out the window.
Yeah, I never thought about that angle of it. Yeah, they were probably a lot more fun and a lot less safe back then.
Yeah.
It would have been exciting as a kid and a little dangerous.
Yeah. It was nice though with them all the way open, having the air blow all the way through and seeing the whole city without glass impeding me. It was a really nice view.
I wonder if they must do more like vintage rides kind of in these like shoulder seasons, like fall and spring, because I feel like they must get crazy hot in the summer and then also like punishingly cold in the winter. But they would have had heating on them. Yeah. Right. I don't know if that works anymore though. I imagine these like cars are just barely holding on.
Yeah. Basically. Well, they ran them this year on my birthday, which is their birthday, October 1st. Yay. That was the year that the CTA, or the date that the CTA started.
That's so cool. I've always wanted to ride one of those. You didn't see any people in like historic dress, did you?
I didn't really notice that. I thought I might, but no.
Yeah, because that's the thing. It's like people do these like dandy meetups or like that kind of stuff, like in conjunction. Because there's a big overlap between people who are weirdly into vintage clothes and also into, trains.
Yeah.
Oh, in terms of privately owned rail, there is a privately owned rail car. I mean, but not by like a corporation and all that. But on the Metro, so Chicago's like commuter suburban kind of rail line, there was to Evanston and Winnetka, the North Shore, the very nice streetcar suburbs. There was a private car. It was membership only. So it was owned by this like trust basically kind of, and you'd pay a quarterly fee. I think quarterly really lets you know like what type of clientele they had, because like that's big in financial circles, your quarter. But yeah, so you had to like, I guess, check ID or your member. They probably had a cool membership card, come to think of it. Apparently it was an old, even crazier, a hairdressing car from a different line somewhere out west is where they bought this. So yeah, there used to be a barber car sometimes on train lines.
I've seen pictures of that.
Yeah, the past is a different world. Like it is a different society. Like it's just hard for us to wrap our head around this. But yeah, some North Shore businessmen bought it, and it lasted the service until 2022. So it nearly survived COVID. It somehow survived 2020 and 2021. But yeah, eventually the bill came due and they just couldn't find enough riders for it.
Yeah. It was the last privately owned rail car in the United States. So that was the final one, and it's sad it's gone. And now it's just in some warehouse in Iowa, and it's not very clear what the future of it will be.
Yeah, I'm surprised. It seems like it had a cool name. It was called Car 553. It had some earlier name where it was called the Deer Path. And I think that's cool, but there's something more cool about like a very boring name. Like there's some fancy restaurant in New York that's just known by its like address. So like I don't know what kind of class study can be done on that, because it's like I feel like it's very middle class angling to like name something a very fancy, the Windermere ride,
Snowpiercer,
yeah, something like that. There's something even richer about giving it a blasé, like very quiet name.
And then now I think we can talk about modern privately owned rail, and we're going to discuss Brightline. So Brightline is a big deal because it's the first private U.S. passenger rail line in the United States in over 100 years. It runs from Miami, Florida to its current terminal in Orlando, and it's been highly successful in most ways, and it's thriving in a state that's not known for its love of public transit.
Yeah, Florida. No, it seems like a great value proposition in terms of these are two. Well, Miami is dense technically, even though it's also very car oriented. It's a strange duck in that way. And then people want and need to go to Orlando for amusement and employment, and it's Orlando.
Yeah. One anecdote though on Orlando, I've met more people from there recently than usual, and it was around the time I was doing the Disney Adults episode and research. And I don't know why, but they viewed me as kind of being provincial for asking them questions about where they're from. It was like they were kind of side-eyeing me, like, why are you asking me about Disney World? Why are you asking about Orlando? But I think Brightline is a bit of a safer topic. They're proud of it.
Yeah, that's so funny. I think they're speaking more to their own shame of being from Orlando, I guess. They're like giving you some side eye of like, what, do you go to Disneyland? Like, yeah, man. Sorry, Disney World, my bad. But yeah, that's like their main business, unless they have some secret industry I don't know about.
Yeah. It was funny. It was one of the people I met. He was like a pretty successful lawyer from Orlando. And then he tacitly admitted that his dad actually built roller coasters at Disney World. And I was like, wow.
He was an Imagineer. That's so funny. This is where I feel some real like growing up in Las Vegas kinship. Because people in these very like recent entertainment oriented like areas like have a bit of a shame about it, but they also want to be proud. I remember in Las Vegas there was big like discount for locals. Like, what's a good place for locals? They'd always talk about Las Vegas locals, and then they'd complain about like tourists. And it's like, that's why we're all here, buddy. Like Las Vegas and Orlando, they both reach this critical mass where like there's enough amusement and one industry for like it's broad amusement for them, and it's casinos and hotels for Las Vegas, but then you need doctors for those people and lawyers for those casinos, and so you build a professional class and a more diversified economy. So we're now meeting the people who don't work directly in it, like your lawyer friend and all that, but they're still going to have a connection to it. Like there's a reason they're a lawyer in Orlando. It's because like if Disneyland was not there, they would not have their job. Yeah, it's so different from like Hawaii, or like it's like Provence in France, which is like used to be a very poor place, and now it's like a tourist destination. And
is that in the south?
There. I think so. Yeah, south of France. Yeah. But yeah, so those people are like, oh my God, our culture is being lost. Like tourists are trampling everything. And I feel like there's this desire to act like that about Las Vegas and Orlando, but that's just not the case. Like there wasn't anything here before. Like,
yeah, no, it's all like show.
Yeah.
So one thing about Brightline that makes it a great service is that the section of Brightline that runs from Orlando to Florida's East Coast, there's about 20 miles of track that reaches speed of 125 miles per hour, which sounds impressive, but in terms of high-speed rail, that's really low. It's something to be proud of here, but not a big deal internationally.
Yeah, it's good when you compare it to car speeds. Yeah, and from my understanding, that 125, that's less of like an engineering limit based on the rails and trains. That's more of like a government limit. Like once you're above 125, like that's so rare that all these things kick in, like all these like different requirements on noise and safety. It's more a legal limit than it is anything else.
Yeah. Because it's actually the country's first private passenger rail service in 100 years, like there's a lot that they're unsure of how to execute here, including that probably. Yeah. But it's been a success mostly in terms of passenger experience. It hasn't actually fully panned out financially yet because, according to an article, in the first quarter of 2024, ticket sales and other revenue came up $23 million short of covering operating expenses for the carrier. The company also has nearly $4 billion in debt. That's a lot.
Yeah, that's crazy. I don't know. Part of me wants to like tut that and be like, you should have had a better business plan. Like, come on, I thought you were good at business. But I'm such a big booster of it that I don't want to counter signal it,
Yeah. I mean, if you think about Uber and Lyft and how they're not financially
Hmm.
profitable, they're cars, and those are like car businesses that have been around even longer and still
Yeah.
aren't profitable. So
Hmm.
maybe it's not a big deal. I mean, as an urbanist, someone who's
Yeah.
passionate about trains, this seems like something they would have condemned by now and been like, this was not a success, we're shutting
Yeah.
it down.
Hmm.
But there still seems to be optimism that they can crack the code and make it profitable eventually.
Yeah, I want to believe in them. I'm just gonna be like openly hypocritical that like, yeah, it's very like lame and decadent that Uber has never turned a profit, but it's cool that Brightline never has because it's trains. But yeah, it seems like more of their angle is that they're more geared towards property development around stations, which is fine. Like, not to accuse them of that. Like, that's how it's always worked.
Yeah.
As we said earlier, like private corporations when they run trains, they really become obsessed with property values around there and selling off land because that's much better and easier money than just collecting a fare from people. And then governments are sometimes better at service, or at least maintaining service. They're more motivated too because they're, liable to their constituents.
Yeah.
It's just about hitting that like perfect middle ground.
Brightline service is pretty good already. Like,
Hmm.
I think they have 30-minute headways for most of the day, and they're also increasing it, I believe.
Yeah, no. There's
Yeah.
an article just from like the past week or so that they're going to try and hit that like 30-minute departure mark. And that's such a good like a kind of theoretical thing to hit.
Yeah.
When I was in Copenhagen, the idea that there was a train every 30 minutes to go to Malmo, Sweden just kind of blew my mind. Like once you reach that 30 minutes, like that's a really key thing, I think.
Yeah. Like Chicago, we're lucky to have our service to Milwaukee that's more than 7 times per day. Like,
Yeah.
that's a lot for this country.
Yeah, no.
One thing about Brightline that isn't that great, though, is that there are a lot of collisions, both with
Mhm.
cars and pedestrians. And there was a recent expose in the Miami Herald called Killer Train. And they found through their investigative reporting that Brightline has killed 182 people since the line first opened, which is the deadliest train line in the entire country.
Yeah, I don't know how I didn't hear about that, like in all my little like urbanist video watching and stuff. But that's crazy on its face, and so like that immediately made me do some soul searching of like, oh my god, I wrote this really nice stuff about Brightline in here. Um, but it's really kind of a complicated issue when you get into it. Of course, like one of the issues that comes up with privatization is they're rarely motivated to care about safety until it.
Yeah.
But it seems like this has reached that point where this perception could start to impact their ability to build more stations and keep on building out this project. So you must imagine they're doing everything they can to solve this, but the corporation seems a little more bent on kind of minimizing and explaining away a lot of these.
Well, they're doing what traffic engineers and other government officials use to explain traffic deaths, which is putting a lot of it on education.
Mm-hmm.
They've been blaming people for not being informed on how to cross their crossing safely. It's crazy that every 13 days someone gets killed by one of their trains, but I think it has a lot more to do with the train line itself because through the expose Killer Train, I learned that this section of railroad was actually the most deadly in the 1990s as well. So even
Yeah.
before passenger service, it was a problem.
Yeah, and there's Brightline is catching the like they're the name attached to it now, so they've inherited a very dangerous stretch. Yeah,
Yeah.
there was a quote in that article from like I believe like a safety engineer or someone who was called in, and he said that when he like looked at the map for the first time, he couldn't believe it in terms of how many crossings there were. Like that's where these are most of the time happening.
Yeah. Because if this was run by a government agency, there would have been more of an impetus to invest in grade separating those railroad crossings. But
Hmm.
because it's a private service that's prioritizing profit, they didn't want to make that investment.
But yeah, and local governments have a part in this too because this number of crossings, they're very motivated to have them. They don't want to cut off like car travel, basically. I think it's a very American idea of like, no, the car has to always have unimpeded ability to get exactly where you want to go. Cars are point to point.
Yeah. Apparently there have been some crossings where the recommendation has been, okay, we can't afford to grade separate it. We should just close this off to car access, period. And then the local towns will be like, no.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Another thing they do that's also crazy is a quote from the article. Deaths have spiked in parts of South Florida where train horns were intentionally silenced after cities and counties demanded quiet zones so as not to bother people living near the tracks.
I understand where they're coming from. Like you don't want noise, but like you also don't want loss of life. Like I guess it's probably people who don't take the Brightline at all or don't really interface with it other than maybe driving across a crossing every so often. But they're like I'm not going to get hit by a train. Like I'm not going to drive like those people.
Yeah. No, that's one of the dumbest types of NIMBYism, which we might end up doing an episode on the urbanist political spectrum and this really amazing meme that sort of lays it all out. But there's one that's like sort of at the top in between left and right where it's just like, I just don't like noise.
Yeah, the ultimate envy. I'm just like, I just don't like noise. Yeah, that's what's governing this, basically.
And then there's another compliment we can give, though, is that I do really like their color scheme. It's really fresh and exciting.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they have a lot of like public perception to fight in this. Like, we don't know what a privately run train should look like visually. The last time people did it, it was like, they were competing against horse and carriages. Like, they didn't really have a blueprint there. But yeah, trains are kind of inherently old-timey. I think Amtrak balances that kind of visual language a bit, where like on the Acela corridor, which is, commuter practical service, it's all about these like clean, new cars that'll take you where you're going. And then on the more scenic routes, more geared towards like vacationers and retirees, it's like, look at this old train we got. We're going to take a slow route through the pretty places.
Yeah, their aesthetic, I would say it's kind of a bit closer to China. That's not a really good comparison. This is like not the same.
But that's what we have to work. Like they're the ones who've been building new rail stations. Like everything looks like China because they're the ones.
Yeah. But Alan Fisher, in a video he did on his channel, he described the aesthetic as flashy and casino-like, and he said he kind of rightfully pointed out that it would appeal to the sort of status-obsessed mindset of someone from Miami. And I was like, you're right.
No, it's like, it's very like glassy, open, very whitewashed everywhere. It reminds me of, like Miami high-rises and stuff. It kind of reminds me of when I was in Las Vegas, like the newest casino, Fontainebleau. It reminds me of their kind of design, just a lot of graceful curves and white. It also seems kind of drinky, the Brightline. They really sell their like cocktails and stuff.
Yeah, they have bars before you get on the train, I believe.
Yeah, it's something you can't do while driving, so you might as well sell that difference.
Yeah. And so Brightline, the line we've been discussing so far, that's the line in Florida. That's technically Brightline East, but there's also Brightline West.
Yeah, so this is between Las Vegas and Southern California. And this has been talked about forever because it's an interesting distance and it's a whole lot of nothing. So you think like, oh, it should be easy enough to find a right of way through just abandoned desert, essentially. But yeah, there was an Amtrak route out here. It was called the Desert Wind, which I think is a great name, but that ended in 1997.
Oh, yeah. I didn't realize that there was that big of a service gap because Las Vegas is one of the main tourism destinations for the country. Los Angeles is the second biggest city. It makes sense for there to be a train that runs between them. But my biggest qualm with this project, which it's a project, it's not complete yet, it's that they're planning the terminus in quote unquote Los Angeles to be Rancho Cucamonga.
Yeah, which is, people already say that like, oh, Los Angeles is actually just a system of cities or suburbs that happen to be called that. But like everyone can agree that Rancho Cucamonga is like not in there. Like it's pretty far out.
No, I think that's technically the Riverside metropolitan area. That's because Metro Los Angeles is so big that urban planners have split it into because it's simply too large to realistically consider as one entity.
Yeah, and usually they're pretty generous with metro areas. So for them to draw a line is like, wow.
Yeah, I love that name though, Cucamonga.
Yeah, it's so fun. I just know it. What was that show with Blake Anderson? Workaholics, which is just about some like kind of bums, some guys who live in Rancho Cucamonga all in a big home together. Like it's just kind of a funny little weird, very Southern California place.
Yeah.
But it's going to end at like an actual train station, an established train station out there. They have a Metrolink station out there.
Yeah, we'll connect to that. And there are actually plans to extend it farther south and then also to build another branch that would connect to California High-Speed Rail whenever that ends up getting built.
Yeah.
So it's cool that it will link up to those as well.
I imagine they just will face more and more pushback the deeper they get into LA proper. And then so Rancho Cucamonga feels like a good enough kind of thing. Like, hey, we got close enough. We can deal with it later. It's just because like, yeah, LA, I was going to say it's not dense, but depending on how you measure it, they actually do have some pretty good density on how you like kind of draw your circle around it.
Yeah.
But it's dense enough to stop a train line, like there's always going to be a house.
But there is a counter argument to be made, which is that one of the advantages that train travel has over air travel is that major train stations can be in the very center of downtown, whereas airports always need to be on the fringes of the city in the exurbs. And, Rancho Cucamonga is the later. It's in the exurbs. It's not in the center of the city. So that makes it a little bit less appealing.
Yeah, no, you don't get that point to point. Yeah, because then the thing is like, all right, you get off your train in Rancho Cucamonga and it's very car dependent. Like, what do you do now?
So construction of the line, it began on April 22nd, 2024, so pretty recently. That's kind of bad timing, though, because Las Vegas has struggled significantly due to a drop in tourism over the last year or two.
Yeah, no, Las Vegas it always finds itself at a turning point every few decades where it has to reinvent itself. In the past, it's pivoted more towards families. Currently, the pivot is more towards, high spenders. They're kind of like neglecting the middle class and the lower than that. So yeah, that's unfortunate because it used to be this place where like everyone could live like a king a little bit, and you can get like a steak and eggs for $2.99, but that's like shrinking.
It's premiumization due in part to monopolization because most of the casinos on the Strip are now owned by two different entities.
Yeah. No, I don't know. It feels like a lot of things in America. It's always premiumization happening, but like I hate the dollar store, but I wish there was like a dollar store for casinos. I wish there was someone like providing this. Well, I was going to say this service as if gambling and losing money is a service, but
I mean, that ties into this like interesting point that was made out in a Reddit post. I'm going to link in the show notes where someone said Las Vegas doesn't have a purpose anymore as the designated area for American vices. And that explains their decline in tourism because you can really gamble anywhere now.
Yeah.
In person with gambling machines, but also on your phone with sports betting.
Yeah, it's a shame. I think that vices should be controlled to one place that has kind of decided to become the like sewer for it all that takes all the vices.
The Sin City.
Yeah, the Sin City, like also just an idea of like a bacchanal kind of place where you can be a well-behaved citizen for the rest of the year, but then, every 2 years or so you go on a business trip and lose your mind in Las Vegas and then go back.
Yeah. I'm a little bit interested in elucidating, though, the difference between a Sin City and Party City, because in retrospect, after we did our Party Cities episode, I've kind of realized that made-up term we used. Maybe Sin City's better, but what do you think?
I don't know. I think that like for places like Cancun, it's not particularly sinful besides like gluttony.
Yeah.
It's like there's families there going around. But then like, Southeast Asian party cities, like, those are more in the like
Bangkok.
The Las Vegas tradition of things with like an extra gross like colonial layer on top of it too.
And then I want to discuss privately owned rail in Japan. As a touch point, I want to use this video that was put out by Carfree Keith. He's a local urbanist YouTuber who makes really high quality videos. And his most recent one was titled How Japan Builds Suburbs That Don't Suck. In the video, he talks about Tachikawa, which is a suburb of Tokyo. That's actually pretty far from downtown, but it's much more urban than any suburb in America. Yeah. Like even Arlington, Virginia, like all the DC suburbs that are a bit more urban, it's leagues beyond it because it connects to 3 JR railway lines, another line called the Nambu Line, and a monorail. So 5 lines converge in one spot.
Yeah, no, they seem like perfectly suited to build up more than your average suburb, and they've really like taken it seriously.
Yeah, they just created this big feedback loop where the suburb kept getting more dense and getting more transit access.
Yeah, and they have lines not even just to downtown. Like sorry to seem so pedestrian American here, but it's like, wow, they can go to other suburbs. Like that's unheard of for us. That was something that in the past in America was served by like interurban trains, like interurban electric trolleys as they were called. But so that's so wiped from our minds, that kind of like point to point. Chicago is, maybe a very stark example of the unipolar was the word I was using, but like everywhere else is always like that.
Yeah. Radial, I think.
Radial,
is the way to say it.
Mm-hmm.
But how did this exactly come to be? So it was a bit organically because in Japan, they have zoning laws, according to Keith, that are much more permissive, where even more residential zones, you can build businesses and you're allowed to build up higher. And so growth and like increases in density happen more gradually. But a lot of it also has to do with JR Railways, which I knew nothing about before this week. Were you familiar at all?
Just from watching a Wendover Productions video on the privatization of Japanese rail. But yeah, it's interesting. It's like I think they hit like a crisis point with their like government-run rail.
Yeah.
Pretty, I was gonna say early, but just, in the 80s basically, and they had to kind of take a wider look and see like, all right, how can we get this thing to provide a very necessary service for our people?
Yeah. Theirs was much later than we had to sort of reorganize our rail system, because basically in the United States, we had privately run railroads that were then nationalized into Amtrak.
Mm-hmm.
Japan has the sort of opposite history, where they had a nationalized rail system that was then privatized after 1987. So in the 80s, as rail had to start to compete with air travel and car travel more, it became far less solvent, and the Japanese National Railway went bankrupt, and then in its place, the government created 6 Japan Railway Group companies, the JR Group. And those 6 companies, they got different sections of Japan. There are 3 for Honshu and then 3 for the other 3 islands, with the Shinkansen network being sort of managed separately, which connects them all.
Yeah, that was, as I was watching that video, my next question is like, where bullet train? Like, where does the bullet train fit into all of this? And that's just, it's a secret third thing. Like they all kind of work in conjunction on that. Yeah, and then the rest of them are left with the task of managing the kind of slightly less glamorous, but still very important rails.
Yeah. The way the lines were kind of divvied up, it was like each of the 6 companies got more profitable lines and less profitable, more rural lines. And it's very difficult to shut down those less profitable ones. So they sort of use the more popular ones to subsidize the rural ones. But why are we talking about this so much? It's in part because this is actually one of the only examples of a profitable privately run rail company in the world. They do turn a profit every year. It's in part due to just them being able to make investments in real estate.
Yeah, real estate is the name of the game. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, it's interesting in America when we had these kind of Obama-era streetcar things pop up, and they're like, oh, these are just used as property development schemes. And it's like, yes, correct. Like, it's a good way to make money, and it keeps it keeps the services invested.
It's my favorite egregious example. It's Omaha. So Omaha, Nebraska, which is, very well renowned for its public transit. It has 1 BRT line. And then I don't know if they started construction, but they were planning a streetcar line. And both lines run east-west, 1 block south and 1 block north of each other. It's ridiculous. Both of them are literally just strategies to increase property value in the area. It's nothing more than that.
Oh, man.
Because it's so redundant. You don't need 2 services that are identical.
That's so strange. It feels like we're so close, but so far, like in our understanding of this stuff. We just have to start shipping Americans out to Japan to learn. But because this is like what they realized in Japan with that kind of allocation of routes to these companies is that, privatization really just benefits those high density urban areas. And then they use that kind of right amount of government basically to say that like, no, you can't shut down the losers. Yeah. There's a process to do it apparently to shut down a line, but they just make it very bureaucratic and difficult.
Yeah, it's often not worth it.
Yeah.
And there's that famous example of that train line that was kept open, or I think it was the station along a train line, but just because there was one Japanese high school student who used it to get to class, Yeah,
it's so it's just so damn charming. It's just so cute. And like, you just picture her there waiting for her one train. Like, I see why that story, I try to find anything deeper about it. There's nothing. Because there's it is just what it seems. Like, it is just the headline kind of. And all the places that reported on it are not even newspapers. It's just clickbait things. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's very Lushan or World Code because it's what is that lonely girl thinking about the whole train ride home?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very cute story. I try not to think too deep about the implications of that, of oh, her town is dying. Her town once justified a train station, and now because their aging population and a shift towards large cities, it's been rendered useless.
Yeah.
But oh well, it's cute.
Yeah. Well, Bokas will keep that town alive.
Wait, what?
Bokas, the Japanese delivery men, those
guys, yes, from Death Stranding.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then I wanted to beg the question, should Amtrak get privatized? Because, if Japan has the opposite history of railroads as we do, and their system is so great today, whereas ours is improving, but still pretty paltry, should we take the same route? And one touch point for that is Carfrey Keith. He actually put out an article on his Substack about if, should Amtrak be privatized, but I think we should discuss that a bit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So his theory is sort of that in America, most lines wouldn't be able to succeed if they weren't run by the government. Because I don't know how familiar our listeners are, but in the United States with Amtrak, the lines can be split into 3 categories. It's like there's the Northeast Corridor, that's its own entity. That actually turns a profit.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then there are the state-supported routes, which are usually shorter distance. Mm-hmm. Illinois has a couple, for example, the line that runs to Quincy.
Yeah.
And then there are the long-distance routes, and these are the least profitable, and they often take 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah, those are the ones for the real rail fans and for, like retirees. So, yeah, it's like Chicago is such a hub for Amtrak. Of course, it's always been a hub for railroads. So it seems like there's all these cool places you could go to from Chicago, and you realize the kind of time involved, and it shrinks your circle a bit. But yeah, the state-supported ones are really interesting because for that, like I think Amtrak served as a good kind of baseline, like impetus for like, all right, we've given passenger rail to everyone, and then states start to see that like, oh, these are economic generators, and like they generate more when there's more trains and you increase service. So it's a virtuous cycle where states start to contribute and have some buy-in.
Yeah. I'm, overall really into trains, but one of my like more contrarian opinions is that I don't actually think the long distance routes are like really that great or necessary. I do think they should exist for a reason I'll get to at the end, but it's not very competitive for a train service to compete with air travel when it's like longer than a day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For all the not shorter, but for the medium distance routes, a lot of them are in that like Goldilocks zone of high speed rail. So people talk about, people draw these fanciful maps of different high speed rail routes that we should try first in America. And those just kind of like, have to ignore the fact that we have routes that just don't exist anywhere else in terms of length. And so it's like, do we just keep them? Even if we lived in a high-speed rail utopia, we could pick each line and say, bam, high-speed it. Like, why would we do that to the Empire Builder, which goes from Chicago to Portland? Yeah.
I wonder if we do have some of the longest passenger trains in the world, because I know we have the longest light rail line in Los Angeles. I wouldn't be surprised if we do. But Keith, he ultimately concluded that a private company would have no reason to maintain nationwide Amtrak service in its current form, or likely in any imagined form beyond the Northeast Corridor and maybe some state-supported routes. Those long-distance routes would be the first to get cut. And something that I sort of realized as I was thinking about this week is that the government has an incentive to offer train service, to invest it in part because it's a matter of national security, because we've seen air travel shut down for various reasons over the past few years or in our lifetime, with terrorist attacks, natural disasters, and then airline system outages like the one with Southwest in 2022. They can render air travel impossible. And we need that as an alternative in case it ever shuts down.
Yeah, not that bad things can't happen to like train tracks or train stations, but like, they just seem like a lot less fragile of a system when run properly. It just feels like we've really over leveraged ourselves on always having a great like air travel system.
Yeah. Or even our like roads, because I was watching a Netflix docuseries on Katrina Come Hell or High Water, where they were encouraging people to leave Katrina by any means possible. Like air travel, all the flights were booked. The roads were also incredibly clogged. People did get out that way, but it took much longer than it should have. And they also did encourage people to get out of the city using Amtrak, which isn't really built for the purpose of getting thousands of people out before a hurricane arrives, but that was an important option that some people did use.
Yeah.
And did you know actually that the hurricane, it wiped out one of Amtrak's lines and it didn't reopen service until this year?
I was just watching stuff on that. Yeah, I heard about this like new Amtrak route and I was like, oh, does this affect me? No. But no, it was interesting. Yeah, because I don't know, I've always wanted to go to New Orleans. And it'd be cool. There's, of course, the city of New Orleans. You can go to Chicago to New Orleans on a very, very long train.
Yeah.
But no, it's a Gulf Coast route.
And then one counter to privately owned rail. So far we've talked about success stories in privately owned rail, like the Chicago L, Brightline, and JR Railways. But most privately owned rail in the United States, it's freight rail. And the Class 1 railroads that we have here are kind of the devil.
Yeah, I hadn't heard this terminology before, but these are the big boys. These are like the large, like rail and train companies.
Yeah, because I think there are kind of 7 large railroads, but there are 4 that really matter. Those are BNSF, Union Pacific, CSX, and Norfolk Southern. That sounds pretty good in today's standards in the world of monopolies we live in, because there are four. But actually, they kind of operate as a duopoly, because two are on one half of the Mississippi and the other two are on the other half.
Yeah.
So CXX and Norfolk Southern are to the east, while BNSF and Union Pacific are to the west. So with every case with monopolies, they're doing some really horrible things.
Yeah. And it's even worse than a duopoly in some spots, because for short-term trips, like often there is only one of those companies that serves between two areas. In the longer stretches, you'll have like maybe a mix of the two, like running on different rails. But yeah, for shorter term stuff, like they can just gouge whatever. And so people end up doing trucking instead.
In Chicago, we have most of them, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of our metro lines are named after them, like UP North.
Yeah, our commuter rail has very esoteric old names for stuff, which makes it very confusing. There was talk of doing a renaming of all the metro lines recently, but I don't know.
Yeah, might as well keep them. But what are some of the things that suck about Class 1 railroads? So Ellen Fisher put out a good video that was a reference I used, but a lot of this came back to me from a lot of the organizing around railroad workers and them not getting sick time. Like Class 1 railroads were in the news a lot for a bit because of both the supply chain crisis and all of the union activity that was happening.
Yeah, so the first thing I think that we've kind of alluded to is that private companies are not great at maintaining like safety and maintenance.
Yeah, they defer maintenance quite a lot. Like Ellen mentioned in his video that Class 1 railroads, they often only replace bridges if they collapse. And here in Chicago, most of our freight lines, or all of them, they're grade separated wherever they come into contact with roads or pedestrians. But those bridges are really poorly maintained.
Yeah, no, one of them went like semi-viral. It was this like just like not connected to the ground steel column, and then someone posted on like Reddit, and it took off from there. And people in the neighborhood said like, "What the heck? We drive under this bridge every day for work." And Metro's thing was like, it's not bad. Like they were just like, it was basically saying like, you don't see what you're seeing, or like there's other columns, or like we looked at it, it's fine. Yeah, just very dismissive. But like that's just the visually apparent ones. You know, that's the one that's in a like busy city and a viaduct that people drive in all the time. So you can only imagine what's out there. Like this is kind of weird, but I wish we had some type of like concrete that would turn bright red when it's lost like 25% of its stability. Like these need to be visual, and like so that companies can be held to account. Because this isn't even a private company problem. This is like also a government or maybe a human problem, that we like maintenance is unglamorous and seems like a waste of money. And so we always prioritize new projects instead. I mean, it even happens on the smallest level of like condo boards. Like I have a friend who's in a condo board of 6 units, and they still defer maintenance on stuff, and no one wants to fork out for little stuff, but they're planning on how to like develop a back deck.
Yeah. I mean, I think of deferred maintenance as being more of an American problem because we've had a century of growth, and we oftentimes think that we just need to expand to fix our problems, not go back and fix what we've already created. But in Chicago in particular, the bridges that we have that are used by Metra and by freight railroads, they are able to get additional funding because they're used for public transit, and they're still in bad shape most of the time. But one thing that really makes Class 1 railroads the devil is that they have started to engage in something called precision scheduling. And this should ring a bell for some listeners, but not all, because it's actually pretty like wonky. But basically the length of trains has increased quite a lot. Like they've started to get to lengths where they can't go around what are called rail passings. So a lot of freight rail lines, they're single tracked. Trains can only go in one direction, and then they need to go and do a passing to allow a train to pass them or to pass the other train, but they're now so long that they can't fit.
And they did this, they're motivated to do this by like labor costs, basically. You can save a lot on labor by just running a longer train. But then, so yeah, there's a savings there, and then the knock-on cost is, it's often borne by people on like, it's not really a cost, but through passenger rail delays. And this is crazy, because I was always told that like Amtrak has priority over freight. And this is like technically true, but it never happens, because like if you have too long of a train, you can just say like, oh yeah, it's too long, I can't go off to the side. And there's no punishment or recourse for this as far as I know.
It's not enforced.
Yeah, it's just not. It's a lack of enforcement. And that's like, I think that pisses off every taxpayer when they're like, wait, it's just not being enforced. Yeah, it seems like very low hanging fruit that basically like, all right, you work with the profit incentive here. Like we just need to make the costs for delaying stuff, for the bad effects of precision scheduling more than the cost of labor. And then the trains will get in line. But I imagine they've lobbied against any form of this.
Yeah. I mean, private equity, they have big stakes in the Class 4 railroads. They're some of the most, well, I wouldn't say the most like profitable, but they're really large, like Fortune 500 companies that do turn large profits. And they have their like thumb under them. Like they will do whatever they say.
Yeah. No. It's funny though, because like, yeah, and this creates like these inefficiencies in the supply chain. But another thing we're told is that America has like the largest and most cost-effective freight system in the world. And that's why your Amtrak train sucks, is because we chose a different path. We chose to prioritize freight.
That kind of feels like when people in the agricultural industry will say something like, you know, our food isn't the highest quality, but it's cheap.
Yeah, exactly. Clothes too and all that. Like, I don't know. I don't think that like cheaper consumer goods are the end goal of society.
Yeah.
I think
consumerism won't make you happy.
No, exactly.
But okay, so the final thing that makes them the devil, poor employee benefits and compensation. So railroads have specific labor laws that do not apply to other American workers. Like, for example, they don't have the right to go on strike, or Congress and the president, they can deny them the right to, which is not the case for really any other industry.
Yeah, it's interesting to see those, like, they're not strikes, they're protests, I guess, of people like in front of buildings holding up signs that say, let us strike. And it's in their own free time, if you think about it. Like they're still working, they had to take some weekend time or something to go and ask for the right to strike. This must seem,
Well, Biden denied it, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to really think back to a lot of this, but I thought that was one of his biggest blunders as president. I viewed him as being a union buster after he did that.
Yeah, that was like, it felt like a huge misstep on that. It's like the Democratic Party cannot lose. Like the union issue is just something they need to like keep. I don't know. I'm going to get too worked up if I talk about this. You want me to cut myself off there? It was just like, come on. And the optics of it all, like, no one will feel like the Democrats have abandoned the working class more than if they jettison unions as well.
Yeah. But the desires of railroad workers to strike, it was for a very just cause. That also made it even more egregious because they, like newer road workers, and new being like 10 years or less, that's not very new, but they were offered 0 sick days per year until 2022, 2023, when this initially resolved. And then Biden, through doing the labor negotiations for them, he offered them 1 sick day per year.
Crazy. How did they end up in this position? There's other like key, important, hard-working jobs that I don't know. I mean, I guess I have to like get a degree in labor history or something to understand all the ins and outs of this, because clearly it is a unique industry versus anything else, like with a long-standing history. But like, God, how did it get to this
I think people can agree that the people that are driving 5,000-foot-long trains, they should be in a good state of health. Like if that train derails because they're not paying attention, like what happened with East Palestine can happen all over again.
Yeah.
But it's crazy to think back to all of these like national headlines about railroads and freight, and like, man, the news lately has just been so chaotic. Like this stuff would never make the news now.
The cut nowadays, no, it's like, it's too policy oriented, and there's not enough people dying, even though people do die in train derailments and stuff. But it feels like it has been a little bit memory hold.
I feel like that would get the news, like what happened in East Palestine. But
it sucks that that's what it takes to get there. Like, I don't know, it feels like a war for attention more than anything else.
Something that scared me actually when that was in the news was someone had mentioned like this could have happened in a higher population area, like Chicago even. Like
the unique problem that happened there. It wasn't that it could have happened at any point along the line.
Because those trains, they're sent through major cities. Like it could have happened here or anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you for discussing this week. This was our most public transit-heavy episode ever.
Yeah.
Which you, as listeners, you can tell we know a lot about. Hopefully you enjoyed it.
We try. I hope that there is someone who comes to us more for fashion stuff, and they like sat through the whole episode, and they're like, wow. I believe in it. Yeah.
Yeah, because this stuff is really fascinating to me. Well, I've done this less lately, but there's a period of a couple years where on my lunch breaks, I would just watch videos on trains like every opportunity I had.
Yeah.
Yeah. And many of the YouTubers that we both enjoy, like Carfree Keith, Alan Fisher, they've done great work. So check out their videos.
No, yeah. It's not always like glamorous, the kind of train world of America, but the more you see of it, you're like, oh my God, this is just happening all the time. It's a whole like parallel world
Yeah.
that keeps everything going in America.
And they know so much more than I do, or we do, honestly, because like they think about it all day.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like I'm sure we've made a few errors. So if you are one of those
Foamers,
YouTubers,
reach
please
out
be
to
kind to
us.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.